5 seconds of it. All right, we're definitely
Ooh.
live now. So, welcome back, everybody, for the WA Lecture Series Episode 2. I know everyone seemed to like Episode 1, so hopefully this one is as entertaining. I know the cool thing about this one is, as opposed to Hope's Last Stand, where it's basically all research and interviewing old members and stuff like this, First Imperium era, I was there, and I was also leading WA the whole time. So, I have a pretty good memory of a lot of this stuff. So that makes it a bit easier to know about some details. But the flip side of that is, unfortunately, the First Imperium era was a chaotic era, I would say, because a lot of it was new territory, both for me and for WA. So I want to open by setting this stage. Basically, WoW was a StarCraft clan for a very long time, right? I mean, founded on Battle.net. Dane even came from previous clans that were still Battle.net clans. So StarCraft was in our blood for so long. But you get into around 2012, 2013, StarCraft was really starting to fade in terms of activity. Not a lot of people there. We weren't getting new recruits. Even with everyone trying really hard, even with our main divisions being StarCraft, we just weren't getting recruits, and WA was kind of shrinking. There's a lot of people fading away into inactivity. It's something that always happens at WA is people go off to school or they move or whatever, and we lose some members. But generally, we always had new people to fill the ranks. Wasn't happening anymore, and basically what had happened was we had two different emperors that succeeded Dane. We had first a Share Noble Sindar replaced him. But Noble kind of went inactive due to some various stuff and wound up not too much happening during that era. Skullrus replaced him. Skullrus was active for a time, but as well, Skullrus would fade away over the course of about a year as well. So we had two emperors in a row that really only reigned for a year or less. So the kind of prelude to the First Imperium era would be when I was named Emperor on November 19th, 2015. So I had kind of returned to full activity in WA around April 2015. I'd kind of been away for a little while, and I was pretty active. I had pretty good credentials, you might say, in terms of I was a knight. I had led the StarCraft division before as captain. I had led a lot of rough platoons, so not trying to toot my own horn, more just saying that when it came to Skullrus being inactive and Dane looking for a new emperor, there was not a lot of candidates there. So it was kind of like, well, this guy's done this stuff, so all right, there we go. And I had talked to Dane a lot about it, but I did kind of feel at the time that there was not a lot of people hanging around that were willing and able to be emperor that Dane really had to choose from. But Dane himself was actively involved with his own mech warrior online division called the Eisengrim, which we'll kind of touch on later. But the short truth of this is that Dane was looking for people to lead WA because he didn't have the time or motivation to do it at that time. So, November 2015, he names me Emperor. So, it would be about, let's see, June 8th, 2016 was when the First Imperium era began. The First Imperium era is the era that came right before our current one, the First Viking era, which started in March of 2018. So there was sort of a gap of about 7 months between when I was named emperor and when the First Imperium era began. So one of the things I did when when I was named emperor was reorganize some things. So at that time we had a few different divisions. We had the Eisengrim and Mech Warrior and the Stone Stars and World of Tanks. In addition, we still had a few smaller groups. We had a Guild Wars 2 division called Hrafenwold, which was led by me and Numenor, as well as we had the Valkyries and War Thunder, which were led by Kanungrumir. We also still had Battle.net stuff, so StarCraft, Diablo, all the Blizzard stuff was all just combined into one division led by Brandalfer, also known as Zadaris. And we had a League of Legends division, Olaf's Berserkers, which was led by Eodor at this time. So this was November 2015. We had all these divisions set up, and what I did was I appointed a couple of Primarchs who are basically the go-betweens between the people leading the game divisions and myself. So the Primarchs were Falkiver Rustling, Hvitarolfur Trooper Grimling, and Athvalar Hazen. Only one of which is still around, but I'm sure you could ask Athvalar about his time as Primarch. But at this time, the Primarchs are basically the go-between between those two. So I set all these divisions up, and basically, at this time, as much as we had all these divisions, our roster was actually pretty small. It's hard to say because we didn't have a census until I want to say 2018, around February 2018. And this was right in 2016. And we actually normally we had censuses every 3 years, so there should have been one in 2015, but we didn't obviously because, like I said, we had a couple of emperors that kind of went inactive, and nobody had really thought to do a census. So unfortunately, we sort of have a jump from 2012 census. The next one's 2018, but the estimates would be that we probably had something like 30 to 40 active members around this time in 2015, which is pretty crazy when you consider we're up around 160 right now, which is pretty unprecedented. But basically, around this time, there's a few different changes made. The big hallmark of the first Imperium era was, like I said, it was kind of chaotic. There was a lot of changes. It was new territory for WA. StarCraft was dead, so we're like, what do we do? What do we do? The big answer seemed to be League of Legends, and that was kind of the decent answer for a long time. Was let's just push League. We did have a lot of people playing League. We started hosting tournaments on League of Legends, stuff like that. Olaf's Berserkers kind of became the central hub of WA. But for a time, WA was kind of, we had a few different working divisions because we did have the Eisengrim, who were definitely by far the most successful in terms of they were successful competitively in their game. They were recruiting a lot of people. They didn't have a lot of dramatic incidents for the most part. And they had a very strong interest in Norse culture and mythology and the stuff WA was about. Um, but the flip side being that the Eisengrim would wind up having some issues with other divisions in WA. And also this feeling that Eisengrim were sort of disconnected from WA because Dane very much built the Eisengrim himself as a unit. So they all were very cohesive. They worked together. They had similar kind of interests and ways of thinking for the most part. A lot of them were older members because a lot of people playing MechWarrior Online were older. They were 40, 50, something like that, as opposed to a lot of people in WA were teenagers or in their early 20s. So I think that played a part as well in terms of there maybe not being as much shared interests there. So there started to become some issues, and some of you may have read the Saga of the Stone Stars, which delves a little bit into some of the issues during the First Imperium era. Now, it's obviously highly fictionalized, but it is inspired by some of the stuff that happened there. One of the small important things I wanted to throw in that happened before the First Imperium era began, but after I became Emperor, December 2015 was when what we call the Codex of the Aesir was created. So what this was basically the idea was that you would send in a statement of information about a member that you had a lot of respect for that you wanted to be preserved in our history. And what I did is I set up an email account, and people could send me in information about a member they wanted recorded. And this was the very early version of the codex we have today on the forums and on Uko, our bot, where we have biographies of all these members and stuff, as well as encyclopedia entries about hundreds of different topics in WA. So technically, it all started December 2015 there. So again, I'll try to proceed through this in an organized way, but it is a challenge, like I said, with First Imperium era because there was a lot of different things happening, a lot of changes, a lot of rank changes and organizational changes, stuff like that. So, I think the easiest way to look at the First Imperium era is, and if you want, you can do this yourself. If you go in the forums into Organization and Rules of WA, go into the archive, you'll see a lot of threads I would make. A lot of them are titled PSA, but a few of them have various other titles, like a few rule changes or updates or things like that, where you can kind of see progressively the different changes I made and sort of the path we walked to get pretty much to where we are today. But here you can see in February 2016, so now we're 4 months prior to the beginning of the First Imperium era, and I know the lecture is entitled First Imperium era, but I feel covering this sort of early precursor period is important for the context too. So one thing that happened was February 2016, War Thunder was deactivated as division. This was Khan's division, the Valkyries. Had not really been active during my reign at all. It was just sort of informally there. So it was made inactive. And another thing that happened was the WA ranks were changed. So whereas before, for a long time, we had these sort of naval ranks, third class petty officer, crewman, chief petty officer, ensign, warrant officer, lieutenant. I mean, you can find these listed under the codex, actually, under our ranks. But I basically took new ranks that I borrowed from the Eisengrim because at this time I really had a lot of respect for the Eisengrim in terms of how mature they were and how well organized they were, and I really wanted WA to kind of move in that direction. So I actually stole their ranks, essentially Jarl, Thane, Rekka, and Recruit. Now you'll recognize two of those names because this would sort of influence our thinking in terms of ranks for years to come. But the idea was that now, instead of being led by captains, or they were sometimes called lord captains or knight captains, if they were either the lord of a house or a member of their house's knight order, they would have that bonus title to their rank. Now they became jarls, and basically the jarls could appoint thanes, who were kind of their second in commands, much like it is today with great companies. But divisions were based individually on games, whereas our great companies now, well, it's the war bands that are based on games. So Rekka was the basic warrior rank as we are today, the equivalent, pretty much the same thing, and there is a recruit rank, which was the equivalent of the scout rank. But there's only those four ranks. And another one at this time, I was trying to wrangle all the knights together basically, because prior to being emperor, I was actually named Sword Arm of the Empire, which was a rank in charge of knights. So at this time, I was really trying to get all the knights together. I was trying to figure out, okay, what is everybody doing? Let's make sure everybody has a job. And so what I did was I had made people have to write night reports to me, where basically they wrote like a little sit rep, and they said what they were working on and what their all that stuff was that they were doing. And I got rid of those in February 2016. But I did start situation reports again. It's worth noting now we probably view situation reports and roll calls as a given, and the same thing was true around 2012. But here in the mists of the first Imperium era, things had really fallen into disrepair in that regard. There was no sit reps, there was no roll calls. Nobody knew what was going on unless they just messaged a Jarl and said, "So by the way, how's your division going?" So at this point, February 2016, I reinstituted situation reports, which would continue till the present, which I think are very helpful because it provides a great way for everyone to just get caught up on what's going on in each division in WA. And then moving on, in April 2016, I made my first PSA public service announcement, which would become sort of a theme of the first Imperium era. So here, the big thing with this one was it wasn't rule changes so much as it was a big rant about disrespect. And if you read this, I didn't call anybody out by name. You might not know what I was talking about at all. So to reveal the kind of behind the scenes this is sort of a symptom of the issues that were cropping up between divisions in WA. Now, worth noting, the League of Legends division, Olaf's Berserkers, didn't really have any issues at all. The main issues were coming up between the Stone Stars on World of Tanks and the Icegrim on MechWarrior. There was a lot of issues coming up because the Stone Stars were, I think, worth saying, very immature. They liked to post ridiculous memes. They were very loud, obnoxious in voice chat. A lot of times they would all get drunk and just hang out and have a good time. And I will lie, I hung out with them too. They're very fun guys. But at the same time, contrast that with the Eisengrim, who were very serious, very professional. These guys had scrims, practices. They're a very successful competitive team in MechWarrior, and they're also much older than the Stone Stars. So problems started to happen when we shared forums, of course. Eisengrim had their own section, Stone Stars had their own section, but when people would trickle in between, conflicts happened constantly. Other problem, we decided to share a TeamSpeak because at this point there was fears that the Eisengrim were drifting away from WA. They're really only interested in working with Dane, that they didn't really care about WA as a clan, and they didn't really know much about it. And at this point, Dane was trying to get them in. He was trying to knight some of the Eisengrim members, get them more involved in WA. And me and Dane were talking about this, and we said, well, hey, let's have a shared TeamSpeak server. The Eisengrim have their own MechWarrior TeamSpeak server. Let's bring all WA on there. Let's try to get them to mingle and stuff like that. This would pretty much be a disaster because the Stone Stars would just jump into Eisengrim channels and yell at them and argue with them, and we had all these incidents, and that's what led to this April PSA, me saying, basically just talking to summarize of, let's be respectful to everybody, please, let's stop doing all this crazy stuff, we need to be respectful on forums and TeamSpeak, all this stuff. Unfortunately, this PSA didn't really do anything, but that was why it came about. So then that sort of leads up to, that was 2 months prior to June 2016, when the first Imperium era would be declared. So, basically, when this came about, the big thing was chapters. If you hear about the First Imperium era, you'll always hear the term chapters thrown around. If you think of chapters, you really want to think about them generally as great companies and or our guilds, because what I did with chapters, what I said, well, you could have a chapter that is just a great company or a warband playing on a game, or you could have a chapter that is in charge of writing stories or something like that. The idea was chapters could be anything. So, chapters came about with the dawn of the First Imperium era in June 2016 that I created, and now I reused the Primarch rank. Primarchs were in charge of chapters. So there's a few different founding chapters, but the only two that would survive the whole duration of the era would be the Imperial Knights, which was my own chapter that I made, which was basically people that I trusted completely, that were admins on the forums, that were admins on TeamSpeak and Discord and everything, that were basically the voice of the Emperor. And only one other person would ever join the Imperial Knights besides myself, as Emperor de facto leader of it, of course, was Eodor, who had become an Imperial Knight and earned his title sort of in that regard by helping to build the WA forums and website and helping me, constantly advising me on stuff. I was always talking to him, trying to figure out what to do in all these difficult situations, that kind of thing. Now, in talking about the website, one other issue that cropped up during the First Imperium era was the ownership of the website and administration and ownership of the WA forums. So at this time, Moscow was still paying for the website and the forums and still had them. Uh, but even though I was named Emperor, there is hesitation on giving me the forums and the website. And there wound up being some conflicts between me and Eodor and Dane in Moscow as far as who should own the website and who should own the forums. And as much as I was very hesitant to confront them about things like this, I did kind of feel like, well, if I'm leading the clan, I need to be an admin on the forums. I need to own the website. I need to have everything to be able to responsibly lead. So there was some back and forth. There was some issues. One in particular where I removed a mark from the forums, which is just like a little app on the forums, and Moscow thought that I deleted it from his web host account, which I didn't even have access to. So me and Eodor were immediately removed as admins uh, immediately, and that was sort of just an example of how things weren't going well between us. We really weren't on the same page at all. But eventually, it did reach this point where we went and I was made admin of the forums. I tried to get the website, but the problem was we tried to transfer the domain from Moscow to me, and it just wasn't working. We had two different host providers, and for some reason we just couldn't get the transfer to work. So the plan was, okay, Moscow will just let it expire, and then I'll buy it right away. So I stayed up. I was ready to buy it right as it expired, and some Chinese company bought the website, and unfortunately that was been the pattern for a few years now. Is Chinese company has wacer.com. So the first thing I did was I made my own domain called Felheim.space, which translates to High Home. In the lore, I thought, oh, this will be a mountain refuge that we ran to when we lost our home, wacer.com. And so we used that for a while. Eventually, I was able to get wacer.net, which is our current website, and secure that, and then eventually that became the main site where the forums are hosted and everything like that. So if we look, let's see. Yes, this would be April of 2017 when Felheim was made. It was a couple weeks before I was able to get the forums up because while we couldn't transfer the domain, Moscow sent me the database for our old forums dating back to February 2010. We had forums even older than that, but a certain warrior, Royal Knight of the Bunker, unfortunately nuked them in a fit of rage before leaving the clan. So all these ancient records dating back to 2010, Moscow sent me them. I was able to hook them up to our new forums at Felheim and get those set up. And let's see, I was just going to try to find when wacer.net was officially created here. I didn't have that date here. July 2018 was when we had wacer.net come up. So that was actually the first Viking era. I believe I purchased wacer.net before then, but I can't seem to find that I wrote down the exact day that was. But it basically was an auxiliary website that didn't really have anything on it until July 2018 when I officially made it the main website. So one thing that did happen throughout the First Imperium era was a lot of shuffling of chapters and companies. So at first, divisions were renamed companies, and I know I said it was just chapters, but it was mostly chapters in the First Imperium era. There were groups called companies, which would sort of inspire the names of our great companies now, who were around. So we had companies, and companies were basically game specific at this time. One of them being Numenor would be in charge of a group called the Frostlith, which would be all of the inactive or kind of guest members. So since we had our Discord server that Solite made in mid 2016, that I later became the owner and admin of, the idea was we had all these what are now guests on our server today, but back then was, well, let's consider these people WA members because we wanted to inflate our ranks a little bit maybe. So we said, okay, Numenor, you're in charge of the guest company. So that's what happened was he had the Frostlith, which translates to frozen folk, and he was in charge of that great company. Uh, and then, yeah, so I'll try to keep proceeding through the PSAs here without jumping around too much. I apologize if it is confusing. Like I said, the easiest way is to look at the WA Timeline Volume 2 on the forums and to proceed through the PSAs in order to kind of see some of the changes in the First Imperium era. Let's jump to September 2016. So here we have a few chapters that were established in June 2016 with the start of the First Imperium era. A few of these chapters were decommissioned, those being the Twilight Vanguard and the Stoic Hand. The Twilight Vanguard was basically the police of WA. They were supposed to enforce rules, inform leadership of rule breaking, and they were led by Athfaller. The Stoic Hand was in charge of poetry, writing, history, all that kind of stuff. Kind of like the Scribes Guild today, they were led by a guy named Mar Kvigrekker Hazen, also known as Skywalker, who you may have heard about. He was a fairly famous lord of House Kilroy, probably the last big successful hero of House Kilroy prior to Athfaller. So at this point, he had been inactive for a couple of years. I brought him back to WA. He started a new chapter, but then unfortunately kind of went inactive again. So both those chapters were decommissioned. And at this point, I was sort of looking for new ideas. One other thing you might hear about was demerits. So at this point, I had implemented a system of demerits where if you did something wrong, you broke a rule, you got a demerit. You get 3 demerits, then you get demoted or maybe even banned or something like that. So a little bit of a archaic version of some of our current system where we say, okay, you get a warning, then a demotion, then a ban. Here, you had to accumulate 3 demerits. But you lost 1 demerit per month, so if you had good behavior for a while, you could go back down to 0 demerits over time. So then we jump forward to the October 2016 PSA. Now here is when the last, well, not the last, but another of the founding chapters from the First Imperium era was dissolved. This was the Emperor's Inquisition, whose only member and leader was Falkiver Rustling, who is the Imperial Inquisitor. And basically, the thinking was that Falk wasn't really doing anything, so we just got rid of it. But the idea was for Falk to be kind of keeping an eye on things, reporting things to me. I mean, he was kind of a spy, essentially. I mean, nothing really shady went on, but the idea was, well, what if I join a channel and everyone's on good behavior? They're like, oh, Vest is here. Okay, we can't say anything, Or what if, I don't have the ability to keep track of every single member. The idea was having an extra set of eyes to keep an eye on things and give me the scoop on that would be a good idea. But basically, not a lot happened there, so it was decommissioned. Falk kind of worked informally in that regard for a while, but not with an official rank. But eventually that kind of faded away too, as Falk and I had a little bit of a falling out over the marks fiasco, which I did mention earlier, how I removed some marks from the forums, and that led to me and Moscow having an issue. Same thing happened with me and Falk, where basically Falk really didn't like that I kind of trimmed down the total number of marks that were given in WA. For example, the Rustlings in particular had a whole mark system. They had something like 50 different marks that they would give out just for people in their family, which I did get rid of because I wanted to cut down marks and try to increase the value. Say marks are something very difficult to earn. They should be something that people really treasure when they do get them. And so I removed some of them, but of course some of the Rustlings, understandably not happy about that, and me and Falk did kind of have a falling out about that. So next I want to jump to November 2016, which was a big PSA, as I titled it. So basically, by this time, I had compiled the Dane Edda and the New Edda. New Edda at this point had basically nothing, but it was created to house all the news stories written in the modern era for WA. In addition, I started a couple of different things. One thing I started was Glory. Glory being a currency, for you old timers, you'll remember Icer Bucks being a similar thing from 10 years ago or so. Glory was created to reward people for recruiting, posting in roll calls, all this stuff. Some of the warbands today use a similar system. But Glory was created for that. It was tracked on a Glory leaderboard, and what happened was I created a WA card game over time, and you could buy packs of cards using your Glory. Which was a lot of fun. We didn't have that many people participate because we only had probably 30 or so active members in the clan at this time, but was kind of a fun little thing that we got going for a while there. So next we jump to the December PSA here, and I'm realizing now we skipped over a bit of a big event, so I'll jump back to that in a moment here. But basically, in December PSA, I sort of reorganized us, got rid of some divisions. So at this point, um, in December, I called the Eisengrim a sort of honorary company of WA because they had really started to drift away. And the Stone Stars, of course, at this point, were dissolved, essentially. And the reasoning being that if you look back at the September PSA, you'll see there's actually a ton of comments on there, which were sort of part of a big issue between me and Soullight and a few others, Khan too, and Ofnir and the Stone Stars group having a lot of disagreements related to, yes, the Stone Stars being very wild and fun and carefree and stuff like that. There's a few instances where they had posted like crazy not safe for work memes in like Mead Hall or whatever, and they had to be moved and stuff. They got very mad about that. There's a lot of clashes between them and the Eisengrim that kind of forced me to take a side in that, and generally I sided with the Eisengrim. But the fallout was both divisions lost interest in WA. The Eisengrim effectively drifted off. They didn't want to talk to anybody in WA, and the Stone Stars basically all left, and a couple were exiled for their involvement in all that stuff. So by December 2016, both those divisions, well, the Stone Stars were completely gone. The Eisengrim were technically honorarily considered a part of WA, but they had very effectively drifted off too. So at this point, WA was in sort of a bad spot. But we looked to continue on. We really pushed League of Legends, and this was when, what I mentioned earlier, we kind of started to host tournaments on League of Legends. We got a lot of new recruits this way by hosting public League of Legends tournaments, by trying to put some ranked teams together. Kanungamir was involved in that a lot because he was still involved with his chapter he'd established back in June of 2016 called the Order of Fenrir, which was in charge of competitive stuff, practices, everything like that. So, yeah, oh, and by the way, just kind of a random event, but in June of 2016, when the era was founded, I hosted the Emperor's Contest of Houses, which you'll see some marks for, some people have, which was effectively House War 6, technically. But my idea was that the Contest of Houses would be a yearly thing. As it turns out, it wouldn't be. It would change, and there'd be a new thing called the Your Thing, which most people probably know about, which is a different kind of house war. But yes, the Contest of Houses was held in June 2016. House Dippity won, but in kind of going with the theme of some strife between divisions at that time, we did have issues where a lot of the Eisengrim were very mad about some of the matches that took place. In particular, there was a match between uh, myself and Dark Spartan, a member of the Eisengrim. We both played in World of Tanks, and I won, and me and some of the Dippity guys were very happy. I definitely don't think we had poor sportsmanship, but that is what the Eisengrim felt. They felt that we shouldn't have been celebrating our victory at all, because to them, they didn't know that much about WA. They didn't think House Wars were very important. But to us, we cared so much about WA here in House Dippity, we were like, holy cow. And this was, by the way, the tiebreaker that won the House War for us. So we were super happy, and basically Dark Spartan was quite annoyed. Went back to the Eisengrim chat, complained about it, as was a recurring theme of Eisengrim having issues with WA and talking about it on their HipChat server, and further kind of pushing the two groups apart, unfortunately. So, yeah, that was another aspect of that. And if you are interested in the Eisengrim and WA split and stuff like that, there is actually an essay I kind of wrote, a long-form treatise, which is in Vesborger's archives. I'm just looking for the name of it. Oh, treatise, The Fall of the Imperium, which is actually going to cover a lot of the stuff that I've talked about here. But that one is pretty cool, and it really sheds a lot of light on the Stone Stars and the Isengrim and all that stuff that I talked about, and hopefully is a little bit uh, more detailed as well. But basically, yeah, WA kind of drifted around, losing even more activity for a while here until May of 2017, when you'll start to see a lot of ranks established that look extremely familiar. If you look at the May PSA, we basically established a new ranking system, which would be Scout, Rekka, Raider, Berserker, Huskarl, Thane, Herseer, Jarl. So the only weird rank you'll see is Rekka. We later renamed it Warrior. But yeah, effectively, these were the ranks that would eventually be used for the current era too. So these were established in May of 2017, and you can look at the PSA for some specific rank requirements, but a lot of them were pretty similar to how those ranks function today. As well, in June of 2017, there is some more changes I did announce, and one of the things I did was I named my first Einherjar. Because to that point, I had kind of felt like, oh, well, I'm leader of WA, but naming Einherjar is like a big thing. That's something only Dane does. But eventually I said, well, hey, I could do that too. So I named 4 of them. That was when we got Conungrumir the Fierce, Athvalar the Valiant, Solios the Hand of the Aesir, and Eodor the Builder, our first 4 Einherjar that I established there. And that was when, yeah, it was around the time, like I said, the new ranks were established. And as well, there was a few other changes. One thing that happened was protocol was reinstituted. This would be short-lived, but protocol was when members were required to salute or call officers sir. They had to salute anytime before they said anything on Discord, the same way it was back in the day when you joined the StarCraft in-game and clan channel. You had to salute before you could say anything. And when somebody else saluted, you had to salute back. So we did that same thing, and it kind of faded away. A lot of people were older, or it was kind of a more lax time, and people didn't really like it. There's a lot of pushback on it. We got rid of it pretty quickly, but that was when it was first brought back. We're sort of getting towards the tail end of the first Imperium era here, because it would be March of 2018 that the first Viking era would be established. But let's jump to September 2017 here. So at this point, there were 2 chapters left from way back in June of 2016 when all the chapters were established. The Imperial Knights, which I went over, and the Order of Fenrir, which I had also gone over. But we established a few new chapters as well. So these were actually established, like, I think over the preceding months, but one of them was the Ulfednar, which was effectively led by Solite, but some pivotal members would be Foldmather, as well as Yarnveer, also known as Eomer, Sindar. They were all pivotal in the Ulfednar, whose job it was to teach people about WA. They were basically teachers and mentors for people. And the Ulfednar actually produced some very solid members, and I think was, in a way, the most successful chapter of WA. Another one was the Praetorian Guard, which was Athvalar's second chapter, basically the successor of the Twilight Vanguard. They too were in charge of peacekeeping and enforcing the rules of WA and resolving disputes. But here in September of 2017, I had decided that, hey, and this would be, in a way, a precursor to Great Companies, because I thought, let's have 5 chapters that everyone is sorted into. And you can only be in one of these 5 chapters. You could be in one of the previous chapters I mentioned, like Order of Fenrir, Imperial Knights, Ulfednar, Praetorian Guard. Anybody could be in one of those or all of those. But there's 5 other chapters which you could only be in one of, and these would be the precursors to Great Companies, effectively. They were the Thunderbolt Marines, the Blades of the Moon, the Abyssal Reavers, Dawnfire's Glory, and the Night Guard. And I'll list the Jarls of each of those in order, probably all familiar names to you. Numenor Sindar, Eodor Lightling, Vesborger Lightling, Solite Yormling. At this time, his family, the Leaslings, had not been created yet. And Kusiag Lightling were the proposed Jarls of each of these chapters. And each one, all the members would be sorted into one of these chapters. But unfortunately, a lot of people felt that, because one other thing I did when I rolled it out was people could choose which one they wanted to be in. So everyone felt like it was or a lot of people felt like it was a popularity contest. People didn't like them. People didn't really understand the purpose. And essentially, yes, there was a lot of hating on these chapters. So as it would turn out, I actually rolled it back 4 days, or 2 days later, rather, in response to a lot of negative feedback on it. I rolled back the creation of those chapters, and instead everyone was just kind of free floating without any warband or great company or chapter or anything. As weird as that may sound in the context of WA today, that was how it worked. So this time we did have those ranks, and as well at this point we had a over the period of the last couple of months a couple of changes to the lordships of houses, because for the longest time House Dane's only lord was Dane himself, and the Lord of House Commander for a time had been Athvalar, because at this point House Kilroy was still part of House Commander. So was House Blitzkrieg. So was House Thief. So it was four houses in one. But eventually Athvalar had become less active, and it was decided to make Conungrumir the new Lord of House Commander and Randalifer the new Lord of House Dane. So if you read the Saga of the Stone Stars, well, you know that Khan, me, and Rand sort of make this trifecta in that story of Dane giving us all a magical weapon and sort of us being the next generation. Everything gets handed off to us. And that was reflective of this rise, which was, again, in September 2017, when we all became lords. Now, I had been Lord of House Dippity at this point for a while. I was originally Lord of House Dippity in 2012, and then Eudor succeeded me, and then I came back and became Lord again in 2015. So I've been Lord for a while, but at this point, yeah, Randalifer and Khan, new lords of each of their houses as well. Yes, one other thing that happened, really the last big thing to cover in the First Imperium era, was what we retroactively call it the Knights of the Imperium, but at the time they're just called Knights. And the idea was at this point that without any great companies or chapters or whatever, WA's leadership was me as Emperor and the Knights. The Knights were effectively the officers, the leaders of WA. So to start with, I named 5 Knights, and those were Conungrumir, Eudor, Numenor, Solite, and Kusiag. And basically each knight had a job. So Numenor and Kusiag put in charge of StarCraft. Eudor and Conungrumir put in charge of League of Legends. And of course, Solite was made sort of a free-roaming knight whose job it was to help everybody throughout WA and to teach them about WA history and that kind of thing. So at this point, it was asked that, or let's see. Oh, sorry, no, that's my mistake. That was something else. And then, yeah, so at this point, one thing I do want to share as well, and you can see this in Vestborg's archives, but a manual of knight training, which was basically how we trained knights in the First Imperium era. So the idea was, if you wanted to become a knight, you could be, anybody could. You became a squire, and somebody took you on and trained you. And as it turned out, only one member would ever complete the training and become a knight, aside from the 5 knights I just named automatically, and that would be Foldmather, who is Solite's squire. And Foldmather completed the whole training and eventually was named a knight. And as it turned out, he'd be the only named knight because we had a few other squires, which included Athvalar and Ulfald, and a guy named Hyperion, also known as Hellstorm, also known as James Lutberg, who most of you may not know. I'm not sure. He used to be a pretty big figure in League of Legends. He's still on the server, still games occasionally, but those were 3 squires and knight hopefuls who, as it turned out, never completed the training. Oh, Randalifer as well was also a squire who wound up, yeah, we didn't. It was only Foldmather that completed the training. So with that in mind, let's see. I'm just gonna double check. Is anything I missed here? But that was about the coverage of the First Imperium era. So to kind of summarize, basically it was a lot of rank changes, a lot of organizational changes throughout the whole era that made it kind of tumultuous because I was a new leader, really. I led the StarCraft division briefly, and I led some rough platoons that had 4 people in them. So I was not, while I had been a leader a long time, never had experience with something like leading the whole of WA, and it was very much new territory. So I was constantly leaning on people for advice, like Eudor especially. I talked to Dane a great deal, and they're immensely helpful for me. But a lot of it was me kind of shooting in the dark, basically, trying stuff. Oh, let's try chapters. Oh, let's try this ranking system. Oh, let's try knights. Let's try all this stuff. And part of that, too, is because I find a lot of the cultural and traditional side of WA super cool. So I was always excited to roll out something new in that regard. And it did create some issues because a lot of people felt that there was not a lot of consistency because things were changing so much. But I was really just trying to find something that worked. But in the end, what happened was, in the way the Knights of the Imperium was probably the best decision I made as leader in the First Imperium era, because what it did was it created an all thing with a series of veteran members, all these knights, and we all worked together to compile the rules and the basis for the First Viking era, which debuted in March of 2018 and is our current era. And basically everything we have now, well, we've had a lot of changes since then. The framework was built by myself and all those knights, and the squires too, because they were in the all thing too. So, I mean, you have to give credit to all the squires and all the knights involved and everybody for their input too. And at that point, Fireside Chat actually started in the First Imperium era, and it became a venue for people discussing building the system. So there's a lot of, you might hear people joke about Numenor's Fireside Chats when Numenor showed up, them going for hours. There's some notable ones, and usually it was with regards to discussing the new system we were building, which became the Viking system. So there was a lot of work and time and effort put into it by me and a lot of other people towards the end of First Imperium era, and finally that debuted with the Viking system, which we are still using today. And just for a closing statement here to give everyone some context, the 2018 WA census was completed. It was in January of 2018, completed on February 1st, 2018. 54 members were recorded. And this included anybody who is even just willing to just send their information. So if you think about it today, we have 161 people that post roll call. Basically, this census only required you to post roll call. We had 54. 4 members of House Kilroy, 4 members of House Dane, 18 members of House Deputy, and 27 members of House Commander. So one thing you'll see and that you may hear about is Randalifer's incredible efforts to revive House Dane, because at one point he was basically the only one. A lot of these House Dane members were, sort of hanging around, but it was really just Rand. He was basically the only one left, and he single-handedly built a house that now has 50 people, and that's not even including House Warden, which has about 24, which sprouted from House Dane. So it's really something unheard of in WA history, which is worth noting. But with that, I think I've covered just about everything I wanted to. If you do look at the timeline, there's a few other various events. You'll see we had a couple members exiled. We did have January 2018, so 3 months before the start of the Viking era. I revived House Kilroy, Blitzkrieg, and Thief. I brought them out from within the umbrella of House Commander and made them their own houses, even though 2 of them were dead. Basically, so Athol became a lord again. He became Lord of House Kilroy. And we did have, let's see, I'm just looking for any other key events here. Uko, our bot, was created in November 2017. Before that, Soullight ran a bot in the server called Scepter that did all the same stuff Uko did. It's the same type of bot, but we thought, well, I'll just make my own, and I named it Uko because I also am super interested in Finnish mythology, and you kind of see that in some of the WA lore stuff, that little influence from me. But yeah, I think this one went a lot longer than Hope's Last Stand, but I suppose that's bound to happen when I was actually there for the events, and yeah, obviously it's something I'm interested in, so I have a tendency to drone on a bit about it. But I think I will go ahead and leave the lecture there. That is it. That is the First Imperium era. So we'll open it up now to our Q&A section. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions about the First Imperium era?
Jeez.
Uh,
Excellent lecture. Go ahead, Patton.
well, were you gonna ask a question, or are you just gonna kiss ass?
No, I was just gonna talk over you. That's fine. Well,
Yeah.
I'd say my one main question is having kind of, you know, grown in your comfort zone as High King, as a leader, having come from Brood War. I mean, I'm familiar with your exploits there, but like in terms of like chief positions as an executive in the clan, kind of feeling your safety zone sort of grow as you tried things. Was there a major lesson you learned from having tried, maybe succeeded, or having tried, having failed, had to revert certain things, or just what did you find as you progressed through things? Were things moving fast? Did they seem moving too fast? Did they slow down over the time, or did you just get a better handle on things? Maybe leading up into now, what we have is this the combination of experience that you've put together things that work better than what we had before, maybe what you tried and failed, or what have you. like do you see an experience factor, I guess, to all this, and what would be the major takeaway?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I've learned a ton. I feel like I'm a completely different leader from when I was first named leader of WA because I really had no idea what I was doing. Things I had on my advantage, on my side rather, that I had playing to my advantage were I always liked talking to people and asking people for advice, and I think that helped in a lot of situations. That's something I was doing even when I first started, so I at least had that going for me. And also B, I was not very confident, which can be bad, but in this case, it helped. There were some positives because it meant that I wouldn't just like, let's say, roll out a new system and ban anybody who didn't like it. You know, I was not confident in my own ideas, so if people derided something, I would say, oh, maybe this is bad. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, you know. So I think that helped a bit, but I wouldn't say that was a lesson. I think the biggest lessons I learned, definitely the biggest one, was dealing with criticism because when you lead WA, you're never going to make everybody happy. And that's kind of a cliche everybody says about leading stuff, but the reality is no matter what you roll out, no matter how many uh, opinions you get on something, you're going to have people that hate it. Some people will hate it just to hate it for no reason. Some people will hate it because they just don't like you. Some people will hate it because it's bad and they have legitimate criticisms of it that you could incorporate. So it's kind of a lot of sifting through that. But that was definitely my biggest takeaway was being able to roll something out and not get really mad or feel bad if people didn't like it sometimes. I think another lesson I learned, not as big of one, not as important a one, but was the ability to bring things back, to retract things, like when I rolled out the chapters and then I got rid of them 2 days later. I think it was a mistake to roll them out, but once they had been rolled out, I think it was the right decision to get rid of them because I think it is important to be able to look at even something like that, which I had spent so long drawing out those chapters. I was so hyped. I thought they were so cool. I thought everyone was going to love them. So I was kind of sad, but I think it is important to be able to look and say, well, you know what? I mean, they didn't work, so we got to get rid of them. You know, be able to do that. There's probably like a secondary lesson I learned, I would say. But I think those would probably be the two biggest things. I want to say there was a third thing I was thinking of in the back of my head that I kind of forgot now. Um, Oh, yes. So being able to confront people about stuff, because I'm inherently kind of non-confrontational. And in particular, this was a factor with Dane in Moscow, because really what I needed to do was just go to Dane in Moscow and say, hey, look, I'm supposed to be leading this clan. I need ownership of the website. I need ownership of the forums. I need this stuff. But I was kind of too shy to do that. I didn't want to do that because to me, I was still third class petty officer Asoto, and Dane was Fleet Admiral Dane. So it felt very weird, even though I had gotten to this point, and there's things that I think had to be done. Like Dane had the law speaker rank, which meant that he could unseat any emperor, so he's effectively higher than emperor in rank. And we also had the well, Dane was Lord of House Dane, and Rand kind of deserved that. There's a lot of these things that needed to be done that I was very hesitant to do because I was like, oh, I'm way too scared to just go tell Dane like, hey Dane, we got a new lord now, this stuff which seemed very hard for me to do. So I think another lesson I did learn, yeah, was having to, yeah, I mean, sometimes you just have to go and do it. Do what needs to be done, and not be super scared or hesitant with that kind of stuff.
Good answer.
The three teachings. Well, does anybody have any other questions?
Yeah, I was gonna ask something.
Sure.
Two questions, kind of. First off, I was wondering because I I joined 1 week before the Viking era began, and I was too confused and too overwhelmed to know what was going on at the time. Um, 1 week before the Viking era began, what were the like ranks looking like, and how was the organization looking like right before everything switched over?
So as it turned out, the ranks didn't look very different because back in 2017 we had incorporated ranks again inspired by the Eisengrim, which were basically the exact same ranks that we had now. But this was in the first Imperium era, right before the Viking era. We had the same ranks we have now, except warrior was called Rekka. Now there were some different requirements because the idea was that you could reach a rank of Huskarl or something. Huskarl was more like Raider. The requirements were a lot more lax because we didn't have great companies or warbands. So ranking up on Discord was effectively just like, oh, this guy's been active a long time or something like that, you know. So the ranks didn't have really strict requirements or responsibilities so much. And even more so, a lot of times we were promoting people and not sticking to the requirements so much. So that
In
was what
that
they
case,
looked like, at least.
what were how was the clan organized at the time?
Effectively, we weren't. I mean, there wasn't
Okay.
any. Yeah, there wasn't any great companies or warbands, so everybody was effectively just in WA. No matter what game you played, didn't matter. And that was basically how it worked. So as far as administration of all the members, I mean, there wasn't really any way for you to say, "Oh, this Huskarl's in charge of these members," because Huskarls weren't even leaders of warbands. Huskarl was just a rank. So basically, yeah, it was just the job of myself and all the knights to kind of wrangle all the members and resolve disputes and stuff like that.
All right. Um, my second question has to do with the creation of the current rank. Because that was done in the Imperium era. Um, and you said that a lot of people were involved in that, but I was wondering how it might have been misinformation. I just heard on many occasions that it was Numenor who came up with the current um, way that it's built, like scout, then warrior, then raider, like all of that. I heard it was Numenor who came up with that ranking system. I was wondering how true that was.
Absolutely, Numenor was pivotal in the creation of this ranking system. I would say Numenor and Solite were definitely the most important figures and voices in the All Thing and voices in Fireside Chats in terms of creating the whole Viking system. But as far as the way the ranks work, like the names of the ranks, um, well, the names of the ranks, like I said, yeah, we're taken from the Eisengrim, but be hard. I'd have to probably go back and look at, like months of all thing chats and listen to months of fireside chats to really know exactly what he did. But I know Numenor was pivotal, and one thing Numenor did that a lot of people didn't, and I'm not trying to like diss any of the knights or anything, but Numenor did, I think, on multiple occasions, just basically write up his own mini version of the handbook, with rules and organization and ranks and everything like that listed in it and just post it in the alt thing and say, hey, I'm not saying this is how it's going to be, but this is my whole idea, the whole package, which was really helpful. And yeah, he did that a lot, and was generally, yes, talking for a really long time in the all thing and in fireside chat. So I think you could say Numenor was the most influential figure on the Viking era. You'd probably have to say that was true. There was a lot of things that myself and others disagreed with Numenor about. That we said Numenor said, no, you have to do it like this, and we said, nope, no, we're not. And he said, nope, that's a terrible idea. It's going to be a disaster if you do it that way. So there was a lot of disagreements too. It's not to say like, oh, Numenor, what we use now is Numenor's system. But in the whole brainstorming process, months-long process of creating the current system that we use now, yeah, Numenor was extremely influential for sure.
All right, cool. I'm I'm glad I could confirm that because I had heard that on several occasions. Um, oh, that's awesome. That's it for me.
If I may add to that, actually,
Yeah, go ahead.
um, having spoken to Numenor several times, here, there, and everywhere, I know a lot of his ideas, from his perspective, were sort of half baked. Like he'd spend all this time generating these ideas, and then they would either get watered down, half baked, or half changed, or they'd become this hybrid thing. So I know he was rather disappointed with that. Because then when it didn't work, he's like, you didn't go with what was really my idea, lending itself to sort of like, well, you know, if you only went full communism, it would work, right? So, he had the idea, he had the ideas fleshed out in his head, but then it was a matter of like execution and like sort of sticking 100% to the plan. Um, so I know that was something he brought up to me a couple times where he's like, "Oh man, if only this, that, or the other thing, it would have worked." And um, maybe it had, but I think if there's enough pushback, then maybe some of these things needed re-examined. But I know definitely. I mean, between he and Soleil just like going on for hours, with the rest of the nights, it was just crazy trying to hash out everything. I mean, it was just one idea after the next. It was sort of a flurry of things. The rate at which we worked was sometimes both dizzying and then at other times belaboring the point now and again on just certain things. So it was like you kind of catch an idea, and if no one speaks up, okay, it's golden. And other times it was like, man, this thing has just been dragging on for like weeks. You get multiple things going, and then it's like that one thing just sticking around forever in chats. So I mean, it was a good way to kind of sort through the stuff, but it was definitely an experience, I have to say. So
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, that's a good point to bring up. Is it wasn't as if Numenor would post like, here's my descriptions for each rank and their duties, and we said, thanks Numenor, those are now the official duties. But like, it was a lot of Numenor would post stuff, and uh, some people would say, no, that's dumb, and it gets thrown out, or Numenor would post something, and we'd say, okay, and then completely reword it, change it, everything like that. But yes, Numenor did throw a ton of ideas out for sure. Him and Soleil did kind of dominate that. And I think to add, I would probably say the amount of time and effort and hours of writing and thinking and talking that went into creating the Viking era, more than the creation of any other system or era in WA history, I pretty much guarantee. Because it was a months long process, and it wasn't months of like how the all thing is now, where we have like one post a week or one post every couple weeks sometimes, maybe. No, this was every single day, hundreds and hundreds of paragraph long messages and debates. A lot of 50 plus new messages from Numenor, 50 plus new messages from Soulite, this kind of thing. But it was a lot. And yeah, like Kusiak said, it was dizzying, and it was difficult because it was a lot of having to sift through all that and create a system. Because I mean, our handbook now is like fairly long, but at the same time, we had so much stuff to work through and to figure out, and we really built it from the ground up with everything. And even the system we have now, we've changed it a lot since the inception. But yeah, I mean, it was a huge process. Well, does anybody have any other questions?
Oh yeah, I bring this up because I know it almost happened to me, but apparently, and you didn't mention this, but Numenor, his chapter, he was in charge of like guests or something, and he wanted to kick people. When did that take place?
the guest thing, should we have guests? Should they be scouts? That kind of thing.
Yeah, so he was put in charge of a group called the Frostlith, which yeah I mentioned briefly, but basically the idea with the Frostlith was it was like inactive people, so the type of people who maybe just post the occasional roll call but don't really interact with WA, or even guests who aren't really full WA members, stuff like that. The idea was he was in charge of that whole group, and that was in. I'm trying to find the exact date in our timeline here. It should be on it. Yes, June 1st of 2017, he was named the Jarl of the Frostlith, and that was with kind of that new era, well, not a new era, but new system I debuted where I listed, or I also named the four new Einar, so like Eudor, Conungromir, and Athballer. So that was when he was named Jarl of the Frostlith. As far as him kicking people and stuff, I can't remember exactly when that would be. I don't have it on the timeline here, but I know that was something he did. It was probably been a couple months later. I would estimate around oh, like just fall 2017. But yeah, I mean, I want to say the Frostlith was dissolved at one point prior to the first Viking era. But I'm trying to see if that is something I have here. Let me double check the other notes I've got here. If, let's see, so this would have been June 2017, it was created. Did we have, let's see, let's check May PSA. Let's double check here. Let's double check. At this point, Numenor was in the Mirror Guard. Let's see, June 2017. The Frostlith should have been officially closed at one point, I believe, but I'm just trying to find an exact date of that. I think it was short-lived. It was only a few months, but I cannot seem to find it. I got one more idea. Let's take a look here. Just looking for the Frostlith forum. Let's see. Frostlith situation reports. September 2017. Let's see. Okay, yeah, so here we can see some of the stuff that he did. You can look at Numenor situation reports in the Frostlith subforum, which is on the WA forums under the Frontier, under other games. As you can see here, not too much big stuff. Let's see here. The foreign rank was created on August 1st of 2017, so this was him basically, so at this point, guests were called Framlings, which is just Old Norse for guest, and the foreign rank was basically used for like old returning WA members or kind of inactive members who were in WA. They weren't guests, they were familiar faces, but they weren't like super active. So, yeah, it looks like that's the last operations for it, so yeah, I'm estimating the Frostlith would have been removed around September of 2017 based on this, because that was the last situation reports from Numenor. But I'm pretty sure I would have made a, oh, yeah, here, the codex entry actually says September of 2017. I was hoping to find, like, a official post I made, like, decommissioning it, but I'm not seeing it. Maybe it was just a post on Discord. That's something I tried to do, was make all official. Oh, September 8th, 2017. Role deleted Frostlith. Okay, there you have an exact date for the Frostlith being removed. September 8th, 2017, and founded in June of 2017.
Okay, it was always just kind of weird for me, like seeing a chapter for kind of like inactive people. It's kind of weird concept.
Yeah, it was. So the big reason was because we really wanted WA members, full members, to only be the active people. So the idea was, I mean, part of it was like a compromise, because like, well, we don't want to just kick people who are semi-active, who are like old WA members. Like, what about, oh, like Dane, or what about Ultima, or Frostolf, or Frostolf is more active now, but and so is Dane. But at this time, there's a lot of members like that who are like very important, famous members. But it was like, you make these guys guests just because they're not that active. So the idea was, okay, let's make them four, and let's put them in sort of the more inactive Great Company, and therefore, yeah, just keep them there, keep tabs on them, keep track of them there. Which, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's a great idea. I'm not saying it's something we would do today, but that was our thinking at the time. Well, does anybody have any other questions? Sounds like no. All right. Well, yes. Sorry if anybody was expecting a real short one. I actually I hadn't timed that, so I wasn't sure quite how long it would go. I was thinking around 30 minutes, but the bulk of the lecture wound up being about 45 minutes. But I guess the more the better. I mean, now it's all preserved on YouTube and everything for posterity. The full lecture, the full rant. So yeah. And with the Q&A and everything, we're here just a little over an hour. So yeah, hopefully, anybody watching it finds that informative. I'll just briefly list some sources here if anybody's curious. You do want to look at, well, Saga of the Stone Stars. This is a new edda. If you want the exciting version, the fictionalized version, but Vesburger's archives are a great place to look. There's a treatise in there called Fall of the Imperium, which covers a lot of stuff that I talked about in this lecture. There's also the WA Timeline Volume 2, which has a lot of stuff, significant events over the course of the era. And finally, you want to look in Organization and Rules, the subforum, and then in the archive, and you can see all the announcements and PSAs I made, significant ones, starting in June 2016 with the founding of the era. So you can kind of see a lot of the announced changes there as well. And finally, we had a Discord server, so you can actually go back, even look at announcements or something, and scroll all the way back up or search for some ancient messages and find some cool stuff that way too. So yeah, I hope everyone liked that, found it informative. And I'm still kind of thinking about what topics to do next for the next lecture series, but I'll try to announce number 3 soon. If anybody has topic ideas, or actually, I'm just realizing an error in the image here. I have episode 1, First Imperium era. First Imperium era is actually episode 2, so my bad on that. But this is episode 2. Episode 3, I will announce. Try to announce that pretty soon. And yeah, so thanks everyone for showing up. Thanks anyone watching live or watching the VOD. We should be back. I'll have some news on Fireside next week and the lecture series episode 3 coming up soon as well. So stay tuned for that.